Today we've got Angus Spritz. He's done a couple of presentations before, and this is a really good topic. The Japanese, well, let me not steal any thunder. The Japanese really got this game under control. So, without further ado, Angus, over to you.
Welcome to this Zoom presentation, which will explore the various seaplane and flying boat types utilised by the Imperial Japanese Navy during the course of the war in the Asia-Pacific theatre. Both seaplanes and flying boats became integral portions of Japanese operations waged in proximity to Australia's northern seaboards, including a variety of missions staged over the continent itself. Of all the combatants in World War II, the Japanese invested the largest amount of effort in the development of the seaplane especially, with a number of differing designs being manufactured to meet the requirements for an expanding variety of tasks. From the outset of World War I, the Japanese Navy placed considerable emphasis upon naval air operations utilising the seaplane. Japan's record of innovation at sea was established in the 1904-05 Russo-Japanese War with the use of the surprise attack at Port Arthur, along with the latest technical innovations such as wireless. During the course of the war, the Japanese built up their own indigenous aviation industry, utilising experience gained from the Western European powers, so much so that by 1918, the IJN was building the first of a lengthy lineage of seaplane types that would parallel future developments elsewhere in the world. Aircraft such as the Rogo Kogata, try saying that after a big night out, introduced in 1918, were to provide the early template for the evolution of the Japanese seaplane design throughout the 1920s. For the evolution of naval aviation as a whole, the interwar years are to aviation historians what the Triassic period basically was to paleontologists, with several different streams of operational development underway to find the best fit for the aeroplane at sea. These streams included the introduction of catapults, the further refining of flying off platforms aboard large warships, and the building of purpose-designed aircraft carriers and seaplane tenders. Aircraft such as the Yokosuka E-1Y mirrored the general trend of the day, which emphasised the role of the seaplane as a reconnaissance/spotter, with plenty of endurance to aid the battle fleet in its manoeuvres for surface operations. By the mid-1930s, the IJN had taken major steps to evolve its seaplane complement for a future conflict with the United States. Introduced in 1935, the Nakajima 8AN Dave became one of the first Japanese seaplanes to be employed on a large scale aboard the IJN's battleship and carrier classes, with the type also heavily utilised aboard the growing fleet of Japanese seaplane carriers, and would go on to see extensive service in the first years of the Pacific War. Alongside this very reliable biplane type, Japanese designs in the 1930s explored other options. These include the Aichi E-10A series, which strongly resembled other miniature flying boat designs such as the Supermarine Walrus, the Yokosuka H-5Y, that was essentially a scaled-down version of the H-6K flying boat, Watanabe E-9W, which was to be conveyed aboard submarines. While the E-9W saw service in a blockading capacity off China in the early stages of the Pacific War, and neither the E-10A nor the H-5Y became major operational types, with structural problems affecting the latter in particular. Nevertheless, this diverse range of seaplane types formed a solid research and engineering basis for the development of more advanced aircraft in the coming decade. As a pioneer in the introduction of the seaplane carrier, Japan placed considerable emphasis upon the construction of seaplane carriers and tenders to play a vital role in the naval staff's chosen strategy. During the interwar years, the IJN's naval staff was committed to the concept of what was known as the Kantai Kessen, the decisive battle, a major naval engagement in the Western Pacific, whereby it was planned that an approaching US Pacific fleet would be lured into a set-piece replay of Jutland after being whittled down by attrition through air and submarine attack, which would permit the Japanese to fight the USN on roughly equal terms. The two Chitos-class seaplane carriers established a template for a combined arms role, through the transportation of Type A midget submarines for use in both the attrition phase and the substantive battle. Both of these ships had almost identical careers, being heavily involved throughout the Pacific before their conversion to light aircraft carriers at the same time, and their final destruction at the Battle of Cape Engano, which was the final major encounter of the collective late engagements. Akatsushima was a special support vessel for large flying boats, as can be observed by the large servicing crane on her stern. She was the only one of 3 vessels in her class to reach service, the other 2 being cancelled during the war. Mizuho was similar to the Chitose class in dimensions, but was powered by diesel engines instead of turbines. While possessing twice the number of seaplanes fielded by the Chitose class ships, Mizuho suffered from a lack of speed, which limited her effectiveness in operations with the combined fleet, and she found herself employed in an invasion support capacity prior to her sinking on the 1st of May 1942. The seaplane tender Nissan represented a further development stream, namely the hybrid cruiser seaplane carrier. Equipped with more powerful engines than the Chitose class, she had an impressive range of over 10,000 nautical miles and was utilised as a fast transport in Solomon's campaign as part of the Tokyo Express system of fast light warship transports, most particularly destroyers, which ran at the slot between Rabaul and Guadalcanal for resupply missions and other localities in the northern Solomons prior to her destruction by an air attack in July 1943. Now, before turning to the majority of the wartime Japanese seaplanes and flying boats in detail, we should first have a brief look at what the Allies and the European Axis were flying. Compared with the Japanese, the British and Americans contented themselves with a rather more limited range of seaplane types deployed, with the Walrus, the Seagull, and the Kingfisher being the most widely utilised types aboard Allied capital ships and cruisers, as well as operating from land bases. And for those, pardon me, familiar with photos of the USS Chicago in Sydney Harbour prior to the midget submarine attack, they will be familiar with the rather large assembly of Curtiss Seagulls on the deck of the Chicago. And in fact, the Seagull came back into service because its replacement, the Seamew, was not a particularly effective aircraft. Now, turning to the shipboard reconnaissance of the European Axis powers, both the Germans and the Italians followed suit, and the AR-196 became one of the most recognisable, versatile and reliable seaplane types of the war as a whole. Arados were flown extensively in the Mediterranean, in Norway, and all other waters where Germany had some form of air control. Where the Germans and the Italians differed from the other naval powers was their regular employment of large seaplane reconnaissance bombers, which became effective weapons platforms for not only anti-shipping attacks and anti-submarine warfare, but attacks against land facilities along with convoy protection and patrol duties. Both the HE-115 and the Z-506 proved to be excellent performers in this field. And as you will note, the Z-506 continued a tradition which basically the Italians, and only very few exceptions followed, of building tri-motor combat aircraft. Let's now return to the bulk of the Japanese types used in the Second World War. Mitsubishi's sole substantive contribution to the Japanese seaplane ranks, the P, proved to be a particularly rugged performer, suited to all manner of tasks, ranging from patrol operations to bomber interception, and the interdiction of Allied shipping. Employed aboard the IJN's capital ships and cruisers, the F-1M saw extensive service in land-based units throughout the Pacific theatre. Australian waters were a frequent destination for the P, with the type employed in activities over the Torres Strait, Gulf of Carpentaria, and the Arafura Sea. The latter contained 2 of the largest IJN land and seaplane bases at Tarbafane and Odo in the Aru Islands, which were the subject of a lengthy confrontation between the RAAF and the USAAF squadrons and the Japanese throughout 1942 and 1943, in particular, as both sides battled to exert air superiority over the seas to Australia's north. With its excellent range and endurance and all-round flying qualities, the Aichi E-13A emerged as the workhorse of the IJN seaplane arm. Like the F-1M, it was widely deployed in the Pacific as a whole and became the standard shipboard reconnaissance type. They were only protected by a single machine gun operated by the rear gunner in its greenhouse cockpit. This sturdy aircraft was deployed in a variety of roles, including offensive reconnaissance missions and ASW duties as a convoy, as an escort. The E-13A was another frequent visitor to Australia's northern shores and was often gauged by RWAF aircraft over the Solomon and Arafura seas. Now, we're fortunate in having some footage, or a silent footage though it is, of the E-13 operating. We can see the setting up for this period of footage. We can see the setting up for the logistics, which were a pretty daunting task in setting up. However, the continuing resupply of these bases became all the more difficult as Japan's fleet of merchant vessels and fleet auxiliaries was slowly whittled away. At this point, I'd like to read a quote from the book Whispering Death, A History of the RWAF Beaufighter Squadrons by Neville Parnell, as to a mission profile, which will give some idea of how the RWAF were dealing with the seaplane bases. On 4 June, 4 Beaufighters raided Tabaphane in an effort to destroy the float planes based there. After arriving at the Aru Islands, it was a run of several minutes up to the coast to Tabaphane. It gave the Japanese just enough warning to get the aircraft into the air with sufficient height advantage over the Beaufighters with their low-level approach. 5 Petes and 1 Jake were in the air, with 5 more taking off. As they were in danger of being attacked, would pull up into a loop and roll away, manoeuvring which the Beaufighter could not follow. In the ensuing fight, both sides suffered damage. 2 Petes, the lone Jake, and Reed's A19-117. On the 12th, there was a change in tactics. 4 Beaufighters came in over the treetops, catching the enemy by surprise, while another 3 went up to 4,000 feet over the target area to act as top cover. 7 float planes were destroyed and 2 damaged during the action. One other biplane made the mistake of arriving on the scene to be met by Forbes and Irwin in A19-98. Forbes pulled up from 400 feet and attacked it almost head-on from 200 metres to 20 metres. A fire started and the plane went down out of control, crashing 400 metres inland from the beach. And finally, resuming on 29 August, 5 Beaufighters attacked Tabaphane, destroying 1 Pete and strafing a 100-ton vessel off Warkay village. The following day, another 6 increased the score. Entwistle and Webb's in A19-17 saw 3 roofs taking off and 1 taxiing out. Attacking the 3rd roof, Entwistle damaged it, then spotted a Pete taking off further up the beach. He pulled up to 500 feet, attacking from a beam closing to 100 metres. The Pete nosed up, stalled, and dived into the sea. So that gives you a fairly good idea of what day-to-day operations involved, where the Allies were attempting to take out the Japanese seaplane presence, which was very extensive. Now, further to the Jake, one of the major areas in which Japanese seaplanes really influenced the naval battle was in gunnery spotting and flare dropping. The Jake was particularly prominent in a number of surface engagements, including the Battle of the Java Sea and the Battle of Savo Island, where its capabilities significantly enhanced the successes achieved by the Japanese cruiser and destroyer forces by providing orbital real-time data for gunnery and torpedo launching, while at Savo and other later battles in the Solomon Islands campaign, the type played a critical role in target marking in combination with the use of searchlights, enabling the Japanese ships to shell and torpedo their less well-organised opponents almost at will. Now, while the Jake became well known to the RAN and the RWAF, perhaps the most infamous reputation in Australian memory belonged to the tiny E-14Y, which conducted reconnaissance missions over Sydney and Melbourne with impunity the Sydney mission confirming targets for the subsequent midget attacks. Designed specifically for the submarine use, the Glen could be assembled within a matter of minutes once the submarine surfaced, being launched off a catapult forward of the sail and thereafter recovered with the assistance of a crane. This aircraft became the most widely travelled of all Japanese combat types, reaching the coastline of the continental United States, southern coast of Australia, while also deployed in the Western Indian Ocean at Diego Suarez, Madagascar. The Japanese midget strikes there on 30 May 1942, which paralleled the attacks on Sydney. Now, before you heard me make reference to an aircraft by the name of the Ruth, to establish air superiority in forward areas where no airfields were present motivated the IJN to pursue the development of seaplane fighters as the solution. Built under license by Nakajima, the float version of the famous Zero was extensively deployed across the Pacific, particularly in the Aleutian Islands. It proved a useful aircraft, but entered service at a time when more powerful American fighter types were beginning to appear. In order to satisfy the need for a more powerful type with a maximum speed well in excess of 300 miles an hour, Kawanishi developed the N1K Mighty Wind, codenamed Rex. Though equipped with an advanced dual propeller assembly, the Rex could only master speeds of just over 300 miles an hour and did not enter service in large numbers, for it too was no match for the American Hellcats and Corsairs. Yet, in an echo of the 1930s evolution of the Schneider Cup winning Supermarine S6B seaplane into the land-based Supermarine Spitfire, the N1K evolved into the N1K2 George, arguably Japan's best land-based fighter in the latter half of the Pacific conflict. With Japan beginning to lose air superiority, the emphasis for seaplane design was now squarely concentrated on survivability via speed. The answer, however, was not to be found in this particular aircraft. The central appeal of the Shiun was its supposed ability to jettison its central float in an emergency, giving the plane an additional 60 miles per hour with which to escape enemy fighters, and landing on the extended wingtip floats thereafter. However, on their debut aboard the light cruiser Oyodo at Palau in early June 1944, the first batch of Norms were all shot down by the Hellcats after the floats failed to detach. The offending mechanism apparently was only ever tested in a wind tunnel and was subjected to no operational trials. Production was curtailed shortly afterwards. In any event, the Norm would have been, even if it had been able to jettison its central float, would have been extremely a difficult proposition to land on anything but calm water because of the obvious distribution of weight with no central float and only two wing floats. Returning now to the subject of hybrid seaplane carriers. While specifically designed as heavy cruisers, the two Tone-class vessels, Tone and Chikuma, could each carry 6 seaplanes with all main armament positioned forward and the rear deck given over to launching, recovery and stowage of these aircraft. Commencing with a rebuild in August 1942, the large light carrier Megami, large cruiser, I apologise, Megami emerged as a hybrid seaplane carrier with provision for 11 aircraft. This form of conversion was also undertaken with the 2 Issei-class battleships in 1943 as a consequence of the Midway debacle. However, neither ship ever served in a dual role, as the proposed dive bomber and seaplane air groups from each ship were deployed elsewhere. The seaplane type slated for deployment aboard these vessels was the newly introduced Aichi E-16A Zuin. The Zuin, the spacious cloud, was perhaps the most advanced aircraft of its type to see service in the Second World War, equipped with dive brakes, amongst other things, to enable its utilisation as a dive bomber. Faster and more heavily armed than the Jake, though with less range, the Paul did not reach operational service until 1944, at which time its impact was minimal because of American air superiority. Although largely confined to shore bases, the E-16As were designated to serve aboard the converted hybrid battleships. However, the squadrons were diverted to shore units before both ships participated in the Battle of Cape Organo. We now move to some more historical footage, this time, fortunately, with a soundtrack from NHK as to some early flights from Nepal. And it is likely that this footage was shot either in the inland sea of Japan or one of the more advanced forward bases.
報告5時の決戦はルソン島をめぐって激化した。爆弾を抱いてその決戦場へ我が海のわらわしは飛び込んでいく。巨大な物量を頼む敵に我は前期特別攻撃隊となって応える。そうだ、戦うのだ。栄光を尽くして戦うのだ。眼中生もなく死もなく。
Designed to accommodate the IJN's new I-400 class submarine aircraft carriers, then under construction, which turned out to be the largest non-nuclear submarines ever built, the Serian was a derivation of the Yokosuka D4Y Judy dive bomber, equipped with a high-powered inline engine, which was extremely rare for Japanese aircraft generally to use inline engines. 3 Serians could be carried in the hangar of an I-400 thanks to their unique rotating wings, which could be swung to the sides for stowage. Rapid launch procedures involved the aircraft flying with 2 detachable floats, or instead no floats in a pure kamikaze role. A large bomb or torpedo could be carried. Prospective targets for these aircraft included Washington and New York City, 9/11 style terror attacks, Bin Laden not only being a filthy terrorist, but a dirty, rotten plagiarist as well, because he pinched the idea from the Japanese. Then the Gaton Lux at the Panama Canal, and finally the large American base at Utilise. However, the war ended before this sortie could be carried out. A land-based training version named the Nansen was built as well to facilitate training of this elite kamikaze corps. Now, having examined the Japanese seaplanes, let us turn to flying boats. But first of all, we will briefly turn to what the Allies were flying. And these 2 types of aircraft, of course, need no introduction. They're, without a doubt, both the Short Sunderland and the consolidated PBY Catalina played major roles in the Allies achieving command of the sea. No doubt whatsoever. Short Sunderland was particularly effective in the Atlantic, Mediterranean, whereas the Catalina just became synonymous with the Pacific, although it, of course, was used in very large numbers in the Northern Hemisphere as well. And these 2 aircraft became expert U-boat hunters, which became their main task, and were just all-round exceptional aircraft. By contrast, the European Axis flying boats left a little bit to be desired. On the left, you had the Cant Z501, which was really something of a relic from the 1930s and was shot down in large numbers. And on the right, we have the Blom and Voss BV-222. Now, the Germans had a variety of very good flying boats, including the Dornier 24, which went into service with the Netherlands East Indies Air Force and subsequently the RAAF. However, consistent with policy in Germany where anything that flew belonged to Goering, which meant it was controlled by the Luftwaffe, not much in the way of initiative was proceeded with. And so this massive design here, the BV-222, only 13 were built. They were usually used as transport aircraft. They were the second largest German aircraft built, a further model of the Blom and Voss being deployed as a prototype and being destroyed. So let us move to the Japanese flying boats, of which the two major ones were the H-6K Mavis and the H-8K Emily. Let's commence with the Mavis. Firstly introduced in 1938 as both a civilian and military aircraft, the National Airway, the H-6K bore a strong resemblance to the Dornier DA-24, and although the latter was a tri-motor aircraft, with extensive service in the Sino-Japanese War behind it, the Mavis was widely involved in the initial Japanese southern offensive and thereafter became a regular visitor to Australian shores. Reconnaissance and nuisance bombing over the Australian mainland became a staple for the type, with sorties as far to the south as Onslow and the West Australian coastline. Though lacking armour and effective defensive armament, the H-6K still proved a pretty difficult opponent to shoot down because of its very large size. By 1942, however, its vulnerability to modern fighters necessitated its frontline replacement by the H-8K, though the H-6K remained committed to convoy escort and other non-frontline tasks for much of the remainder of the war. Again, we're very fortunate in having some footage from NHK of the Mavis in action. It also includes some interesting footage of the return of ashes of an apparently senior officer. I would like to think it was Yamamoto. I don't believe it was, but some others who are watching this may well be able to figure out who it was.
見よ、アメリカが日本侵攻を夢見たアリューシャンの拠点に海の精鋭は勇姿を浮かべて待機する。世界の樹木を衝動し米英をして眼色ながらしめた空海陸一体戦士未曾有の有効なる共同作戦はかくて素晴らしき成功のうちに推し進められている。2月、ケゼリン艦掌守備部隊6500名の有志とともに尊き御身をもって南海の果てに参下させたもうた公爵音羽正彦少佐のご英霊は4月12日、御父君朝香宮康彦王殿下、御兄君高彦王殿下をはじめ立てまつり、軍代表参列してお迎え申し上げるうちを丸々空港に無言の凱旋を遊ばされました。
So let us move on to the last and the best of the Japanese aircraft we're looking at today, and that is the Kawanishi H-8K Emily long-range flying boat, of which an example you see in the introductory slide is still on display at the museum in Kanoya. Considered by many aviation historians to be the finest aircraft of its type deployed in the Second World War, the H-8K had an inauspicious start to its career when first flown in prototype form in January 1941. Difficulties with the hull design due to the narrowness of the lower portion gave trouble with its handling, so extensive modifications were made to improve stability. These produced a first-class aircraft which differed from so many Japanese types due to its very heavy defensive armament, particularly partially self-sealing fuel tanks and additional armoured protection for crew. Its first mission on 4 March 1942 was a night attack against Pearl Harbor and the occupation of an advanced refueling point at French frigate Shoal denied the Japanese the opportunity for further missions for reconnaissance of the base just prior to the Battle of Midway, which proved decisive. 3 nuisance raids by Emily's were conducted against Townsville in July 1942, and other missions over Australia were forthcoming. The H-8K was highly respected by Allied air crews due to its defensive firepower. However, the rising tide of American air superiority ensured that even this highly competent design could no longer survive in unfriendly airspace, as the Japanese naval air arm slid inexorably towards defeat from mid-1943 onwards, with the following footage providing an apt conclusion to this narrative.
Our patrols have spotted an enemy search plane and are after her. She's a big bird. A 20-ton, 4-motored Kawanishi seaplane, the kind we call Emily's. Miss Emily's a tough old girl. Right now, she's screaming for help and telling Tokyo by radio where we are. Hellcats are closing in on her.